Please welcome to the stage journalist and activist Shaun King.
Brooklyn, what's up? Put your hands together one more time for Nita Turner. Now, about 9 months ago in Los Angeles, I co-hosted a criminal justice reform event with Bernie and Patrisse Cullors from the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was so warm. It was so warm and beautiful outside. But in that event, I got the wonderful opportunity to introduce Bernie. And after I introduced him, his wife Jane and his son came up to me in tears. And they said something to me that I have never said out loud until now. They said, "Shaun, all these years, we've never heard these stories that you told about our Bernie." And I could hardly believe it. And they told me that Bernie just never wanted anybody to feel like he was using his time in the civil rights movement for his own personal gain. And the truth is, that's what we love about Bernie. But here's the thing. Because most of us never heard these stories about him growing up here in Brooklyn or being a real activist in the civil rights movement in Chicago, because we never heard those stories, for most of us in our minds, Bernie has always been a disheveled, gray-haired, bespectacled politician. Like for most of us, Bernie starts in our mind for who he is right now today. And don't get me wrong, I love who Bernie is today, but I need to tell you a little bit about how he got here. Here's why. Listen. His journey to this moment is so much of what makes him special and what makes him different. And it's his journey here, not just his political views, not just his policy plans and ideas. It's his journey to this moment that makes me trust this man with our future. Listen, Bernie Sanders was born right here in Brooklyn the same year the Holocaust began. The next year, when Bernie was just a baby boy, his uncles Jacob and Abraham, his aunt Shauna, and her son Leopold were all killed in the Holocaust in Poland. Oh, no, that's the wind. Right. Bernie never met them. And in the community that Bernie grew up in, right here in Brooklyn, this was a common story. Every other shopkeeper, every other neighbor had all lost huge swaths of their family to the Holocaust. And to come of age in that time, in that space, it gave Bernie a deep sense of right and wrong. But I also think that the trauma that Bernie's family faced and experienced, it also meant that you really didn't talk about your pain. It was just too hard. And right before Bernie started school here at Brooklyn College, his dear mother Dora passed away. And just 2 years into his time at the University of Chicago, his father passed away as well. And so you have this young 19-year-old man whose father narrowly escaped the Holocaust, whose parents both passed away. You have young Bernie Sanders alone in Chicago at the height of the civil rights movement. And I need you to understand that we must reject this idea that who Bernie was in the 1960s is irrelevant. I reject it. Because who you are and what you do, what you fight for, who you fight for, and who you fight against, it's always relevant. Listen, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when people step up and run for office, what they did and where they were during the Black Lives Matter movement, it will mean something. Where they were during the Muslim ban, where they were when immigrant children were being ripped away from their families, it's all going to matter. And here's the truth. If what Bernie did in the 60s doesn't matter now, then what we're doing right now doesn't matter, and you and I know it does. Nina quoted it earlier. Dr. King said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." Bernie was just a teenager when he moved from Brooklyn to Chicago. And it was the most tumultuous and challenging time that this nation had faced since the Civil War 100 years before that. And most Americans, particularly most white Americans, remained completely silent. And it was that silence in the face of lynching, in the face of water hoses, in the face of bombings of homes and churches, in the face of assassinations, in the face of attack dogs being released on children. It was actually that white silence that broke the heart of Dr. King as he languished in the Birmingham jail. And it was that silence in the face of evil that Dr. King said actually tells us more about the soul of America than the brutality itself. And Bernie loved Dr. King, young Bernie. And long before we used the phrase white privilege, Bernie had the notion that he needed to use his own white privilege to fight back against racism and bigotry and inequality. He's been doing it. And Bernie had a desire to hold this country to a higher standard, and that feeling began to well up in Bernie as a young student at the University of Chicago. Bernie actually became the chairman of the university chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and he merged that group with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Listen, these weren't just photo ops. Bernie literally helped lead the first known sit-in at the University of Chicago. He's been doing this. 33 students camped outside of the president's office protesting segregated housing on campus. Listen, Bernie was so disturbed by police brutality in Chicago that he once spent an entire day blanketing the city with flyers on the issue, only to notice that he was being followed by police who were following him and taking down all the flyers. Listen, Bernie hates telling these stories, and he's resisted using them for political capital across the years, even when we've told him, Bernie, you've got to tell your story. It's because he does what he does because he cares. Listen, he's always felt that what he did in the 60s paled in comparison to those who were beaten or lost their lives. And so he's kept some of these powerful stories to himself. But let me tell you something. He did march with Dr. King. He attended the March on Washington, but he did even more than that. Listen, this is not some exaggerated myth. This is the origin story of a political revolutionary. Let me tell you, in 1963, just 9 years after Brown versus the Board of Education, the white power structure in Chicago was still fighting against school equality like their lives depended on it. They literally treated black children in Chicago like they had the plague. And not only were black schools underfunded, they were overcrowded and bursting at the seams. And at the same time in Chicago, every single black classroom was past capacity. Sometimes school children were sharing chairs and desks and sitting on the floors. And a report found that 382 white classrooms across Chicago were completely vacant. Mayor Richard Daley and the school superintendent Benjamin Willis decided that before they would allow a black child to fill a white classroom, they would start putting raggedy trailers on playgrounds and in parking lots to give space for black students. And those trailers were broken down. They were scorching hot in the summer and bitterly cold in the winter. And they would allow rats to come in and out of the trailers at will. And these awful trailers became known around Chicago as Willis wagons, named after Benjamin Willis, the school superintendent. And just a few days before the March on Washington, listen to this. In August of 1963, the city of Chicago was about to install some more Willis wagons for black school children. And a brave group of interracial local activists and organizers decided to put their bodies on the line and block the installation of those trailers. And Bernie was one of those activists. Listen, Bernie Sanders literally stood in front of bulldozers to block the installation of those Willis wagons. And as Nina said, those young activists literally chained themselves together. And out of reverence for what activists in the South were doing, Bernie has downplayed this demonstration, but it was a powerful moment in the student movement. Side by side with two black women, Bernie chained himself to them and refused to move. Listen, even when the Chicago police told them that they were going to arrest Bernie and forcefully remove him, he refused. Even when they decided to arrest Bernie and pick him up and carry him out of that parking lot, he kicked and screamed and resisted the entire way. Have you seen that photo of the police carrying Bernie? I love that photo. He won't even let his feet touch the ground. Listen, and that photo to me is not just who Bernie was, it's who he has been his entire life. Bernie has been giving the man hell since the day he was born. He's been doing it. And for you to tell me that all of that means nothing is preposterous. It means everything. Bernie was a protester. He was an activist. He was an organizer. He is literally the only person in the United States Senate with this story. I could tell you a dozen more stories, but I wanted to tell you who Bernie Sanders was when it counted. I wanted to tell you who he was before we knew him, before we ever felt the burn. Before he ever ran for office, before he was ever a national figure, he was a fighter for the people. Listen, he has always rejected the status quo. He spoke out against apartheid in South Africa when crazily that was an unpopular thing to do. And even today, he speaks out against apartheid-like conditions in Palestine, even though it's not popular. Listen, I don't care when 45 calls him Crazy Bernie, because he is just a little crazy. And I think all of us got a little crazy in us, if you know what I mean. Here's how I was in California when Bernie Sanders went to Disneyland and literally said that he did not think that Mickey Mouse and Goofy approved of Disney not paying their workers a living wage. You got to be a little crazy to do that. Who does that? How is it that 1 in 10 of their workers have been homeless the past 2 years? That 2 out of 3 of their workers were food insecure, and 3 out of 4 of them don't even make enough money to pay their rent. Do you know how much guts it takes to call out one of the most beloved brands in America for underpaying their employees? And guess what happened? Disney announced that they are going to pay all of their workers at least $15 an hour. I don't want to hear when people say, what has Bernie done? That's what Bernie's done. On just this past September 5th, Bernie Sanders and Congressman Ro Khanna introduced a bill. It's how I know Bernie's a little crazy. They called it the Stop Bezos Act. Let's not beat around the bush. It's the Stop Bezos Act. That was on September 5th. And 3.5 weeks later, Amazon finally came and announced they're going to pay their workers at least $15 an hour. Listen, in 2016, like so many of you, I campaigned hard for Bernie to be president. And to this day, I still believe that he would have beaten Donald Trump. I want to share a personal story with you, though. Nothing touched me more, nothing sticks with me more than how Bernie on the campaign trail in 2016 showed so much love for our friend Erica Garner. She was fierce. She was one of a kind. She spoke truth to power right to people's face. And when most campaigns were rejecting her and criticizing her, Bernie brought her on the campaign trail. When you get home, I'd like for you to go to YouTube and search Erica Garner, Bernie Sanders campaign ad, because I think that campaign ad was the most compelling ad of 2016. Erica was forced into becoming a revolutionary freedom fighter after the NYPD murdered her father in cold blood. I know we might be on TV right now, but Erica had a bullshit detector and she could see BS from a mile away. And so many politicians had looked her in her face and lied over and over again about the justice they were going to give her family. And Bernie was one of the only political leaders that she trusted. And she loved him. And she gave her life fighting for justice for her father, Eric Garner. She was just 27 years old when she died of a heart attack 2 Decembers ago. And my very last conversation with Erica before she passed away right here in Brooklyn was about how much we both loved Bernie and how much we both hoped he'd run again. Listen, she loved him because she knew that at his heart, he was just an activist pretending to be a politician. Listen, she knew that he was an activist determined to change the system from the inside out. And Bernie, if you can hear us, we're out in the cold right now. We're standing with you. Yes, Bernie, because we believe in you. But Bernie, we're standing with you because you help us believe in ourselves. You help us believe in our potential to make this country and this world a better place. Bernie, you help us believe in big ideas. And that all these years that you're still a dreamer makes us think it's okay to be dreamers ourselves. Bernie, we love you, man. We love that your campaign, that our campaign kickoff for you was in the snow and cold, because we hope it shows you, Bernie, that the people are with you. Brooklyn, are you feeling the burn? Listen, Brooklyn, thank you for braving this cold weather, but without further ado, let's give a huge welcome to our brother, our friend, our fearless advocate. Brooklyn, give a hometown welcome to the man that has been speaking truth to power for generations, the next president of the United States of America, Bernie Sanders.